Is the lead insurmountable? The realist in me says yes because it's PSG, but you never know in sports. Like, who could have predicted that Declan Rice would crank back-to-back dead balls, top bins against Real Madrid? The other night, the local hockey team, the Vancouver Canucks, were down 5-2. They score 3 goals in less than a minute to tie the game, then they win it in overtime. Nobody in the history of the National Hockey League has ever scored 3 goals in less than a minute to tie a game. Anything can happen in sports, but I have this fear that the Villa players will live to regret the circumstances in added time. Presented by 24/7 Services, let's review the 3 key issues or moments that define Paris Saint-Germain 3, Aston Villa 1. Welcome inside the parlor where just before recording I had to decompress a little bit, and in honor of our opponent I rolled some fine Gitane tobacco and gently puffed some blue smoke into the sky while listening to Edith Piaf, reflecting on how we might have controlled that game better after taking a 1-0 lead. A lot of delirium would have set in when Morgan Rogers scored. A lot of fans thinking, what if? Is this happening? Oh my God, it's real. Some of the players might have even allowed those thoughts to creep into their mind. Not me. I still sat terrified watching through my hands from behind the couch. I'm not saying the tie is over, but I was quite surprised reading social media how much people just kind of dismissed them as not really being one of the contenders. One guy even said, well, they're not the Goliath that everybody makes them out to be. And I'm sorry to tell you, but they are. And they are the clear favorites to win the Champions League, in my opinion, from this point on. And they're not going to go to Villa Park and just sort of sit in a low block and invite pressure. They're going to go and play. They're going to be brave. And in fact, Villa has to assert itself at some point and go after goals, which to me only kind of plays into their hands even more. Obviously, this would have been quite an occasion for the traveling support. And as much as PSG is a huge and iconic club all on its own, one of the reasons why is it's Paris. I mean, if you're a young, talented player and your agent comes and says you have a couple of offers, the money's exactly the same. So would you rather live in Paris or, say, Manchester? Guess what the answer is going to be. Don't kid yourself. It has not hurt this current PSG team. Now here we see something iconic, and the Eiffel Tower as well. Samir Gabi was among the throng of traveling supporters. Samir is wearing this soon-to-be-released Henson Retro track top, and the 25% off sale is still on at divisionretro.com until the second leg of this tie. I've put a link in the description with the promo code. The statistical story is not surprising, but a bit bleak, as we really were second best in most categories, with the exception of big chances created. We're doing a great job of limiting those big chances against us, but when you have guys like Doué and Kvaratskhelia shooting from distance and tough angles, you don't need to deny big chances. PSG's pass percentage on 840 passes is extraordinary. That is dominance. Touches in the opposing box also 58-9. And I say this all the time on the show. You rest in possession, you suffer without the ball, and Villa did a lot of suffering on Wednesday, and that takes its toll both mentally and physically. I said in my last show that Villa had won 8 games on the bounce because I had inadvertently included the victory over Al Ain in the Middle Eastern training camp during the international window. Still, a win is a win, and the Arabian Gulf League is no joke, man. I mean, the second place team right now is the Sharjah Culture Club. And, you know, their rallying song is, "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?" The first big issue is always going to be team selection, and we rotated 8 players again from the Forest game on Saturday, and it all looked very logical to me. The same front group that finished that game was the one that started this one, with John McGinn playing that more conservative style number 10, maybe a little bit more defensive minded, even though it was our meatball who pinched the ball beautifully upfield that led to our sensationally executed opening goal. I was fascinated in comparing the average age of the respective starting 11s. Paris Saint-Germain, 21.7 years. Aston Villa, 24.7 years. We're on average 3 years older per player. Now, you could argue that experience is important in this competition, but they have constructed a very talented young side here, and this is a good lesson maybe even for our club, that you can win and do well with youth. Morgan Rogers, all you have to do is go out and find it and then develop it. And then, of course, you have to entice it to join you. Paris, Birmingham. The Seine River is lovely, but it ain't no canal. Big issue number 3, PSG praise. I don't want to pump the tires of our opponent too much here, but you know what? I don't impress very easily. And I have watched a lot of Paris Saint-Germain during their Champions League journey, and quite frankly, it started very poorly, but since the knockout stages, they've turned things around. And as much as they are capable of rampaging in transition, which is frightening to watch and maybe their biggest threat, what I did not realize until Wednesday was the intensity with which they work to win the ball back. That I did not see until now. And they do it all over the park, and it feels sometimes like they have an extra player. That's how hard they surround and swarm and suffocate their opponents. I don't see any other team left in this competition that has that level of intensity pressing the ball. I don't think you come to this channel to hear me make excuses or pump up false hopes if I don't believe it, or talk bullshit in general. In fact, if you watch the last couple of episodes, you'll have seen me say clearly, we are in for it in this particular round. Not just because of their recent form, but squad value alone. They're worth 200 million more than us. Imagine what we could do with 200 million more. Gone are the days of bringing in the Ibrahimoviches and the Neymars and the Beckhams. This is a thoughtfully constructed side with huge potential youth, coached by a serial winner. You know, Unai Emery respects all of his opponents, but he also will be mindful of the balance between, too much respect and being proactive in the tie, because there's only one thing that matters to him, and that is getting through the round any way you can. Still, though, he's had a tough time against his Spanish counterpart. He's only won 2 games against Enrique, and there's been a couple of very high-profile Champions League ties between them, most notably when he was at PSG and Enrique was at Barcelona. But games are not played based on the history of the manager's record or by squad value or by what the bookies say. Games are played by players, and they are decided by what happens in the respective penalty areas. Still, Paris Saint-Germain were and are the heavy favorites to get through this round. I watched their Netflix series recently from a few years ago because I wanted to find out more. I didn't know a lot about this club. It is a massive club with quite a history in an iconic city, and since the Qataris took over, huge resources and ambition. In fact, the biggest thing they've wanted since they took over is to win the Champions League. They just clinched Ligue 1, and they managed to stay undefeated in the league campaign this season. They didn't start their Champions League campaign very well, finishing 15th out of 16 teams, but man, they've figured it out since the knockout stages. As I'm recording this on a Wednesday, it's exactly 2 years to the day since I met Paul Handsaker of 24/7 Services for the first time, and it was wild how it all came together. We were meeting at the same golf course where I had interviewed Tony Morley just a couple of days earlier, and Paul had just had his knee surgery done, so he was a little bit immobile, but showing me all this cool memorabilia. And that's when he told me that he and his dad, Ron, were huge fans of the Holy Trinity show, and could there be a 24/7 Services tie-up somehow? Well, here we are 2 years later. The show is still going and growing. It's my primary job 24/7 Services is booming busy with projects all around the country, and look at where Aston Villa is. I mean, if you had told the two of us where Aston Villa would be in those 2 years, I don't think either of us would have believed you. Here's a dramatic residential project the team is working on right now, and all I see here is that space for the big screen TV mounted straight into the wall above the fireplace, showing the mighty Villa on a Saturday morning. These guys do quality work. They are obsessed with not just the final product, but also customer satisfaction because they want those customers back. I'd love to feature your work if you're a Holy Trinity show viewer that's done projects with 24/7 Services. It was a no-brainer to have them as a title sponsor. And the free, fair quote process starts with the numbers in the description or through the company's website. You're not going to hear me say this very often, but Boubacar Kamara did not have his best game in an Aston Villa shirt. And I would have thought that being on home soil and with Didier Deschamps in the house scouting for France, that he might have been one of our leaders in this game. And his stats weren't terrible, but I have this habit of keeping inventory of players' actions. So if a player has a really good action to start the game, I bank it, and then I tend to watch and see if they can keep it going. Similarly, when your first action is poor, I store that one away as well. And he had a lot. He just could not wriggle out of the pressure like he normally does in games. He wasn't breaking up plays or making tackles. And when a pass was on, he had a difficult time completing it. And again, some of that comes down to the pressure of the opponent. Big issue number 2, managing moments. I'm quite sure that one of the priorities heading into the first leg was to not let PSG rampage in transition. Yes, they could pass you to death and then pick the little spaces and play through you to score goals. But for guys like Dembele and Doué and Barcola and Kvaratskhelia, when those guys are running at you with pace and impunity, that's when the problems start. And for the most part, we did pretty well on that front. And when our block was low and they were kind of stationary, it was hard to get through us. Frustrating, though, was when we conceded those goals. The 1-1 goal came just 4 minutes after Morgan Rogers gave us the lead, which reinforces an old footballing adage and cliche that after scoring a goal, you are vulnerable to concede because you mentally switch off. And it's ironic that Villa's most productive 15-minute segments in a game in terms of scoring are the 15 minutes before and the 15 minutes after halftime. We're +4 in each in the Premier League. Those are also the times where you're vulnerable to concede, the last 5 minutes of a half and the first 5 minutes of a half. Sure enough, we concede pretty much in both of those 5-minute increments on either side of half-time. The 1-1 goal is the second phase of a corner. I mean, it's an absolutely beautiful strike. Just before Doué hits it, though, did you notice that Emi Martinez takes a little step to his right? I'm not sure if that was to get a better view, and I'm not saying that he would have saved it had he not taken that step, because Doué hits it so pure. It's almost like Declan Rice's second one with Thibaut Courtois standing on that side of the goal. Now, could Rogers have done better in covering Doué? I don't know. But the frustrating thing is, a minute before this goal, we had the ball in the front third. First, Morgan Rogers wins a free kick. Then from there, we earn a deep throw-in. And shortly thereafter, the ball comes to Matty Cash, and out wide, he tries to cross but shanks it, and it's out for a goal kick. Well, within a minute, the ball's all the way down the field. They force Emi Martinez into that crazy save that he makes, and that leads to the corner. I mean, at that point, we had done so much defending. We just needed to string some passes together and keep possession. The goal was a gift. It came totally against the run of play and 10 minutes before halftime. Very easy for me to say this from the comfort of my own couch, but could there have been a way that we might have managed those 10 minutes just a little bit better? The 2-1 goal is so disappointing because once again, we have the ball in our front third, and then Marcus Rashford tries a clever little back flick that Yuri Tielemans simply cannot corral, and boom, it's 2 passes And the Prince of Georgia is in our penalty area scoring from an almost impossible angle. This is PSG at its best. A transition, a quick counter, precisely what we would have talked about avoiding, especially in the first 5 minutes of a half. And the number one key moment that defined PSG 3, Villa 1, and this ties in with managing moments, late lapse. After the 2-1 goal, you were thinking it, I was thinking it, I'm sure Unai Emery was thinking it, hopefully the players were thinking it, we were all thinking we cannot afford to concede again. Lo and behold, a minute before the 3-1 goal, we have the ball in PSG's end on a corner. And what do? We work a short routine that finds its way to Morgan Rogers. This time, though, unlike Saturday, he doesn't hit the target. It flies over. It looked like the shot of a very tired player who went the distance again. But after the goal kick, we had more than enough time to recover, drop, get in our shape, and we get split wide open. And I would love to know in the debrief, which is either happening now or is about to happen, what the messaging would have been about our idea on the corner or in the subsequent moments following the goal kick. PSG is just allowed to have the ball at this stage with really no pressure. And when I see it from this angle, I mean, Amadou Onana is putting some pressure on the ball, but Boubacar Kamara has dropped off to become almost like a third center back. So there are big gaps, both vertically and horizontally. We are totally imbalanced. And then it's just a straight through ball that beats everybody. Kamara tries to win it by sliding, but when he doesn't get there, we are in deep, deep trouble. I've already spoken at length about all the young attacking talent PSG has at its disposal. Nuno Mendes is a fullback, and at 22 years of age, he may be their most talented player. I mean, you can't beat this guy in a foot race, as Morgan Rogers, John McGinn, and others discovered. But then he joins the attack and gets forward, combines with his teammates, and does this. Completely bamboozles two players at once before finishing like a 27-year-old seasoned striker. And I realized that everybody in white at this stage was completely and utterly shattered because they had so much defending to do, so much tracking, so much shifting. Most tiring of all is maybe the concentrating. But that third goal has made the second leg so much more complicated for Aston Villa. I did say after the Forest game that a 2-goal lead is one of the most awkward in sport, and I could absolutely see Aston Villa eking out a 2-0 win in the second leg and then grinding it through until the epic Martinez versus Donnarumma penalty shootout. One of the interesting dynamics about the second leg is that PSG will not be playing a league game this weekend. Villa will. If you ask players, they will tell you would rather play than train. And you know, Villa's in this rhythm now. They're getting a lot of legs involved in the game. You play, 3 days later, you play again. 4 days later, you play again. You are into that rhythm. The only real factor is fatigue. The Sill Hill Brewery star performer was the Aston Villa traveling support. And the brewery's flag was making the rounds in Paris. And if you were photographed with the Sill Hill Aston Villa flag, you will be rewarded prior to the second leg at the Tap Room in Aston. And speaking of rewards, the Tap Room is also going to be showing the FA Cup semi-final and will be introducing the same incentives they had for the Preston game. So if you can't make it to London and you want a different experience, go watch it at the Sill Hill Tap Room and hopefully enjoy a complimentary beverage or 4 or 5. And if you live in Warwick, the Craftsman Pub, run by mad Villa fans, are also going to show the FA Cup semi-final. And you know what they're going to be serving? Sill Hill's Holy Trinity Special Ale. Now we face one of those very tricky trap-type games, also known as a banana skin game, against the already relegated Saints. So here you have a team that has absolutely nothing to lose. They could play free. They could play loose. We have to overcome the disappointment of a difficult performance. And we've had this tendency this season to drop our levels in the league after a European game previously. The good news is we have plenty of fresh legs to choose from. Ross Barkley was in the squad. Leon Bailey is close, but we could rotate the squad 8 ways again and have no drop in level. these kinds of games do frighten me more than even the Forest one this past weekend. And if we go to Brentford and win along with Brighton and then beat Nottingham Forest, those are all meaningless if we can't go down to St. Mary's and pick up maximum points. And you'll recall the game in the reverse fixture between these two on a terrible, blustery day at Villa Park was difficult and quite a chore. And so the all competitions winning streak comes to a humbling end at 7, and maybe more importantly than the physical recovery that needs to happen between now and Saturday, Villa players mentally need to park this one and try to get out of these little habits that we saw earlier this season, conceding late in games or from transitional play, because these next 2 weeks could decide our Champions League fate for next year. The Premier League does have that 5th spot now, and that is very attainable for this team, which has Newcastle and Manchester City on the horizon. We cannot look past Southampton first, though, this Saturday. Until then, safe travels home. Merci beaucoup for watching. And of course, up the mighty Villa.